Hello, everyone, and welcome again on behalf of my fellow panelists. I'm only going to, like I said last time, if you were here last time, I did the most boring workshop, which was last week on the what of cultural entrepreneurship. Today is going to be much more exciting, and the topic is how. Which is kind of cryptic, I know that, but the idea is to have our panelists, and I'll introduce them in just a second, shed light on the ecosystem of organizations in the arts and culture world, right? Because one of the things that's important if you want to be an entrepreneur, and data and study after study have shown that entrepreneurs that do the best, this is just broadly entrepreneurs, not just cultural entrepreneurs, are the ones that start an organization in the area that they're most familiar with. So typically people will start something in the industry that they've already been working, or in an area of interest to them. And the reason for their success, or for their higher likelihood of success, is that they know they know the system. They know how the game is played, so to speak, and they know where the gaps exist so that new firms and new ventures can actually fill those gaps and holes in the ecosystem. And so the idea in today's panel is to equip you with that information. What is the ecosystem? What is the industry, so to speak, look like for the arts and culture world, so that you don't have to have been spending time in that world necessarily or directly in order to come up with an idea that would have a high likelihood of success in this arena. So I'm delighted to welcome two people here who are absolutely appropriate and just in the right spot to tell us about this. I have right here Eleanor Cleverly, who's a communications specialist for Sustain Arts, which is an initiative run out of the Kennedy School, and Eleanor will tell you a little bit more about it in just a bit. She's also the Arts and Culture Fellow at something that I just found out about. It's called the Center for the New American Dream in DC, which is trying to sort of which is trying to understand how we can have a non-consumption related experience in our lives, which is, I think, very interesting because I have obviously a lot of opinions about this. She's a graduate of the New School University. And next to her is Michael Spalter, who is an alum of the business school here at Harvard. He's currently the chairman of the board of trustees of RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. He's also on the board of the. He's also a trustee of the International Council of the Louvre, and also on the board of D.E. Shaw, which many of you probably have heard of. Michael is also has this unofficial role of Chief Evangelical Officer of the Cultural Entrepreneurship Challenge. He's a strong supporter and has driven quite a distance to be here to talk about one side of the ecosystem of the arts and culture world, which is the artists and how they perceive the ecosystem, what are the gaps that they would experience in that ecosystem, and so forth. So let me hand over the floor to have both of you switched on your mics. Good.
I think so.
This is the professor in me coming up, and I'm going to start us off with just a very broad question to Eleanor, and ask her to talk a little bit about the various kinds of arts and culture organizations, if you can sort of, not a typology necessarily, but sort of categories of the kinds of organizations in the United States.
So let me know if you can't hear me. We're good? Great. So, just to go back to what was mentioned about Sustain Arts here at Harvard, the initiative that we're working on out of the Harvard Kennedy School is really attempting to look at this ecosystem holistically. So the majority of the examples I'll use today, I think, probably go outside of any traditional category, and that is what we're seeing the ecosystem evolve to. So our initiatives to go into regions where there is a thriving ecosystem, understand what who is participating in art and culture in those regions, and really be able to map that back to audiences, to funding streams, and to actual locations. And what we're seeing is that really there's probably about 5 broad categories that I could place most of the arts organizations. And the first is those legacy organizations. Those are the organizations like your Live, like your Met, like your establishments. They're the ones that are there for hundreds of years, that are meant to be endowed for hundreds of years. I think that there's a lot of community-based arts organizations coming up that I could take a billion different forms, could potentially become legacy organizations, but are traditionally meant to serve a regional population exclusively. And there was a great Times article about community-sponsored arts, these CSAs that are actually about connecting local artists with local patrons and a one-to-one relationship. I think unincorporateds are a really important role, play a really important role in the sector, and are places where you don't necessarily think of it as an organization, and yet there's a lot of potential there. And my favorite example, which is now an incorporated example, but is Burning Man, right? So you take a seed of an idea to create this kind of spontaneous moment. And to be completely honest, it's no longer that 68,000 people went to Burning Man this year. It generated $25 million in revenue. There are places where unincorporateds have a lot of opportunity to expand. There's the social cause. While this challenge I think is meant to bring out the social cause and entrepreneurial spirit in arts, regardless of what category, there are people specifically dedicating their time to that, and I was really involved with Games for Change while I was at the New School. I think that's a great place where there's a partnership between the actual social impact of gaming culture and connecting the two. And then lastly, just the platforms that are really enabling arts to be either distributed or funded, or consumer-to-consumer relationships, like Etsy, like Kickstarter. These are digital era organizations that I think are supporting the arts and would not necessarily be in place were it not for the internet.
So what's the distribution of for-profit and not-for-profit? Because there is this sort of feeling that especially the legacy organizations are typically not-for-profit, and that might be one of the reasons for their long-lasting impact. What is the distribution, and how do you see the difference in impact between the two forms?
Sure. I mean, I think that the distribution is still heavily not-for-profit. But even in any of those models that are those examples I just gave, there's now incorporating for-profit, enterprise within the model. And so, I personally am not as connected to the legacy organizations, and maybe that's because I really do care about innovative models of sustainability, and those organizations traditionally are looking at creating, large endowments. Those funding relationships have existed for a very long time, and it's these models that, like the CSA model, which is actually, if you think about it, it's a not-for-profit. These, one-to-one patronships are similar to what you would see when you would buy art, a patron would buy art in the past. You're just doing it at a community level. So I still think that there's like a disconnect between the idea that you have to be all profit or nonprofit. And I also, was at a talk this morning, and part of the conversation there about sustaining arts, even in like the Boston ecosystem, really centered around the idea of what non-for-profit means. And so non-for-profit does not mean, running a deficit or just breaking even. Non-for-profit, you can build a surplus, you can have a surplus in your organization that supports risk and innovation, and it does not have to be a scrape it paycheck to paycheck moment.
Is there a sense though that the sort of artistic integrity of an organization is best upheld if it's not for profit, and whereas you would sort of go down a commercial landmine if you were for profit and pursuing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely. I think two examples. First, again, I just did a case study in this, so it's in the back of my head. But Burning Man is now a for-profit enterprise, and they are actually shifting it to a nonprofit because they really feel like the community is not supported in a for-profit model. On the flip side, when you're looking at innovative models of for-profit, Kickstarter is a profit, it's a for-profit company. It's a platform that's built around supporting cultural enterprise. And the thing about that is that you start to get into these definitions that are defined by the platform. And so I think that's a really scary endeavor for an artist to say, I have to be able to get my art funded, I have to be in one of your categories. Mm-hmm. I have to not only do that, but commercialize my art to some extent because I need to repay you for being a patron. And I think those are really can be very threatening. I don't think they always have to be, but I see that there's an argument for why.
So I'm gonna come back to you in just a moment, but I want to take advantage of the fact that we have in the audience, and we have a movable mic in the audience, Henry McGee, who is a professor here now at the business school, where he has arrived after graduating from the business school in 1979, but after spending several years as the president of HBO Home Entertainment, and which is not only intentionally a for-profit, but actually makes a profit as well, which is rare, I can tell you that. And so I would love to hear how HBO manages that. I mean, almost everybody knows HBO is also very critically acclaimed for the content of some of its programming, and I would love to hear his perspective, and for the benefit of the audience here, on the for-profit model in arts creation.
Thank you. I want to talk about HBO, and since I've grabbed the mic, I'm also going to talk about a couple of other models. The model that allows HBO to, at the same time, do documentaries, award-winning documentaries about subjects that you would not normally expect on primetime television, and at the same time do a series like Game of Thrones, really is a subscription model, which is something that's used quite heavily in the nonprofit world as well. The idea is that no single work, if you are in an artistic enterprise, there are going to be some things that are going to work very well and some things aren't going to work well. And a subscription model really gives you a steady stream of income, which allows you to experiment. And if HBO were commercially driven, the way the broadcast networks are, where we live or die on the eyeballs from any one program and how many ads we can sell to Pepsi, it would be, the programming would look very, very different. So the undergirding, the economic model of HBO really is based on the idea of subscription, which is something for you to consider as you think about the business models you're going to put together. I also want to say that this is not to put you off, but the cultural ecosystem is a very complex one, but that also allows a ton of opportunity because it can range from the nonprofit to those operations that are solely for nonprofit and those that are there for profit. I'll give you a good example. I'm from New York, and in August, you could have gone in New York to have seen, well, I'll give two examples. Same playwright, same city, two very different economic models. In August, you could have seen Shakespeare's Love Labour's Lost for free in Central Park. 30 days later, if you want to see Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, the top ticket would have cost you $250 per ticket. Same author, same city, two very different models. So when you think about that, you've got to think about the arts runs on a profit and loss statement. You've got to have income, expenses, and just figure out how you're going to do that. In the case of the Public Theater, which put on Shakespeare for free in the park, it was a combination of subscription revenue that they had gotten earlier in the year from their subscribers, donations, grants from the city, and they worked out quite carefully where the money was coming from. On Broadway, it was all going to be based on ticket sales and the $25 T-shirts they were going to sell. So it's a complex. It can range from profit-driven model to a totally nonprofit, something that's based solely on ticket sales, something that's based on subscriptions. But all of these models are open to you as cultural entrepreneurs, and I'd urge you to sort of think through each and every one.
Thank you, Henry. And I'm hoping when we open up for questions, people can address any questions to you as well. Do you want to, anything you want to add to? I would just say, what needs and holes do you perceive in the ecosystem?
Well, I mean, I think that the legacy organizations are really struggling with the idea of sacrificing a model that has worked for so long and experimenting in that. And so I think that the opportunities, that all of these other maybe more recent and maybe adolescent models could bring is an inspiration to experiment outside of those norms. And I just think that one of our case studies is Detroit, and Detroit is an apt example of what it looks like when a legacy organization is challenged, not just by things that are pretty difficult to sometimes counter, audiences or changing community culture, the expectations around education and those environments, with the stress that the economy puts on traditional sources, even public sources. And so, unless you're willing to say, like, I'm going to fight for this, where that's the energy that the arts does bring, I think it can become a very scary and sometimes competitive environment when it can be a lot more collaborative.
I just want to, as a segue into what Michael has to talk about, I do want to mention, though, that the legacy organizations, regardless, have this reputation that is a huge asset, right? So think about any really well-known, reputed museum, especially a contemporary art museum. I'm just using that as an example because the artists would be alive, the ones that are being shown there, and think about how an artist would be almost willing to pay to be in there, right? And I think that's one of the important things to remember as you think about ideas for disrupting the existing ecosystem and being much more helpful and sustainable in the long run, which is that how do we, is there a way, and if there is, how would you do it to generate that same level of reputational asset, right? That same level of enthusiasm among all the stakeholders that are going to, so the community needs to feel, the patrons need to feel like this is something worth spending my time on, either for the subscription and spending money on, and the artists need to feel like they are not going to be let down or somehow be considered less valuable just because they engage with an organization that is new and disruptive and not maybe following the norms that are in place. So that this is something that that keeping in mind what it is that artists are looking for. It's not just it's probably not just money. It's definitely but not just fame. It's sort of some level of legitimacy and money, and a combination of that that artists are looking for. And keeping that in mind as we think of business models in this ecosystem is helpful. But let's hear from Michael, who interacts with a lot of artists on a daily basis, both sort of the fine art artists as well as what is often known as the commercial artists or the designers in the world. What are these creators and artists? What are the resources they're looking for? What is it that they really desire? I said something, but maybe you have different
I want
data.
to respond, but as a student over 20 years ago here of Newton Noria's, I want to just go back to the vision of this program, since so many of you are new. And I'd like to just read a little passage from an alumni of Harvard College that was written in 1963, in a speech that he gave at Amherst College. And I think that anyone who's in this room, you're part of this journey and hopefully the realization of this speaker's vision 50 years ago. And I quote, "I look forward to an America which will reward achievement in the arts as we reward achievement in business or statecraft. I look forward to an America which will steadily raise the standards of artistic accomplishment and which will steadily enlarge cultural opportunities for all of our citizens. And I look forward to an America which commands respect throughout the world, not only for its strength, but for its civilization as well. And I look forward to a world which will be safe not only for democracy and diversity, but also for personal distinction." And that was President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And I think that it's very appropriate as we are about to mark the tragic anniversary of his assassination. So to Mukti's question and to President Kennedy's vision, what this program is doing, hopefully, is going to empower literally millions of artists, both here in the United States and tens of millions of artists around the world in hundreds of countries. And what we have experienced both here in this country and in countless other countries is that for the artist, it's often a lonely road. And that is a lonely road because we have not built the sufficient ecosystem around nurturing, cultivating, and supporting those creative souls, whether you're in the literary, performing, or visual arts, whether it's the culinary arts, the book arts, musical arts, visual arts. And there are not that many, frankly, places to go. And the world, when we talk about the 1%, in the art world, it's really the 1/10 of 1% in many of the fields. You have people who have profound passion, but they do not know how to become sustainable. And when I say sustainable, they're spiritually sustainable. They're often artistically accomplished, but they're not economically sustainable. And the places to go are few and far between. So when we mention Kickstarter is funding, as of last year, about $150 million of projects. That is more than the entire NEA's budget in this country. If you read yesterday, there were in Dubai about 100 777 X's sold for $90 billion. And to put that in perspective, 1% is $90 million. The institution that I am very proud to be the chief steward of, the Rhode Island School of Design, many consider the preeminent art and design school in this country, has an endowment of roughly 300 plus million. And then I pick up the paper and I read about a Francis Bacon triptych being sold in the last 48 hours for about half of RISD's endowment. And I sit here and I say, what does that mean and what does that say? And I think that there's hope, and there's hope because of a program like this and the people in this room. But words are kind of easy. The question is, how do you marry artistic vision with entrepreneurial skill set? And if you are a lone artist or if you're a part of a collective, there are not that many places to go. And right now, in 2013, many of us have lived through one of the greatest economic crises probably of our lifetimes, certainly in the last 100 years. And those countries, and I think of specifically Europe, that have relied heavily upon government funding, are facing austerity measures that are wiping out the livelihoods of many committed artists. And that's true for this country as well. In terms of personal philanthropy, of which members of this community are incredibly beneficent in their support of so many cultural institutions, and I heard a statistic that on every major, the top 50 nonprofit cultural institutions, there is a Harvard person involved in either the board or at the chair or vice chair level. That's not going to sustain an organization or an individual if you're relying upon the whims of someone who is fortunate to be blessed with philanthropic capability. What really will, which is I think the vision of this enterprise and this program, is if you can, in this place with people like Professor Kayer, learn how to create a enterprise that addresses the market. And that's a dirty word at times, but it's a word that has to be embraced.
So I'm glad you brought up the dirty word, but I was going to say, I was going to ask you exactly that. How do artists perceive this sort of invasion of commerce into their artistic worlds, and do they want to be able to, pursue art for art's sake, or are they looking for more economic, money-generating opportunities? How do they balance the two?
I think that I have the privilege of meeting many students at RISD and FAR. And if you're a student and you're idealistic and you're going to put yourself in debt of roughly $250,000, you can have the greatest of intentions to pursue your art. And if you're a student who's from 18 to 22, and of course there are resume students who come back, when you wake up and you're 25 and you're bussing dishes in Greenport or in San Francisco because you cannot make a living and you're in debt, the idea of commerce is no longer so crazy. And our society has, and when I say our society, I don't want to be Western-centric, but particularly in the West, we have elevated and deified people in the arts in the last 20 years and have created a uber class of artists. And those people, even when we were having conversations about who's a good artist, it often is determined by the layperson is, are they making a lot of money? And there's a difference between making a lot of money and making a sustainable living, where you're pursuing your profession and your passion. And right now, there are too many people who achieve success or enter the academy and maybe in different pockets of the academy and are, blessed to have tenure, but have lost sight of what it means to be a practicing artist. And I don't know how many of you know practicing artists. You are one. Are you self-sustaining on your art alone?
No, that's why
Well, we're delighted to have you here. Congratulations for being here. You?
Fortunately, yes, I am.
That's fantastic.
I'm an artist, yeah,
And how long did that take?
it took about, I've been out of school for maybe 5 years now, and I probably just got to the point, say, half a year ago.
And are you an exception to your friends?
I think so, yeah.
Right. So there are many places to go for help, but I don't think you want to go to places for help, which is again why this program exists. You want to be a maker, not a taker. And being a maker means that you learn certain skills that can make you economically sustainable. And I have met some of the most extraordinary artists in history, and you think of some of the great iconic visual artists who died in abject poverty, who today in these most recent auctions have works that are selling for centimillions of dollars. I wrote to someone, could you imagine someone like Vincent van Gogh looking down from, if you believe in heaven, and thinking about his total abject poverty, where he was selling giving his canvases away for more oil paint, and finding out that all of a sudden there are people who are somewhere in this world willing to spend $100 million for the work. That's got to stop. And the way it stops is by having students and educators and business people come together to create skill sets, which is the purpose of the academy, where you can have tools so that as an artist, you'll learn what it means to market yourself, to deal with cash flow, to understand that if you're joining a gallery, does the gallery have money to pay you? Will they take your work? What will they do with your work? And it's a very applicable, back to the skills that I was taught by the people here, and I'm sure, Henry, you'd probably agree, that the skills that you learn in terms of marketing, they're transferable to any kind of industry, whether it's the for-profit, nonprofit, or government sectors. And as an artist, you can be involved in the for-profit, nonprofit, or government sectors. And the idea of commerce and art, to me, is not unlike C.P. Snow's classic in 1959, where people were debating the importance and the great divide between the humanities and the science. We're at a moment in time, and I think it's now, where people are saying, no, we need to marry the two if we want more people to have access to artists, to millions of artists, and not just us discussing a Francis Bacon or a Warhol that has been at auction.
I think Michael's bringing up Francis Bacon and the recent astronomical price that his work fetched at auction brings up another important point that we hope that's best to be kept in mind as you think about the business models, that the arts and culture world tends to be a winner-takes-all market. And it may not be one single winner, but it's like a handful of winners that are, yes, better in quality, but the differential in quality is not necessarily proportional to the differential in the market value that they fetch. And so, you can argue endlessly about the quality difference between Francis Bacon and Picasso, or Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud, or whoever it is. And that can be done academically, but really, is there a huge difference between that tier of artists and literally the next tier, which is very, very large? I would actually venture to say no, it's not. It is certainly not proportional to the market value that the winners fetch for various reasons. And I think the idea should be in thinking about cultural entrepreneurship, about how the spoils of the market, so to speak, can be a lot more equitably distributed among all artists that have comparable quality rather than just a few. We should always, I think, have the just a few which do get who get consecrated for various reasons as the artists of their lifetime or of several lifetimes or whatever it is. But I think it's important that the next tier also feels part of feels what is in economics often known as the sort of trickle-down effect, but gets a lot more of the share of the value that people clearly place on good art. It's not as though they don't, but there have to be ways of making sure that the two get connected. The people willing to place value on the art and the people producing art. Before we open up for questions, was there anything that either of you would like to add? Eleanor.
Just adding to that point, I think it's, part of that discovery is looking at what is already working in that space, and I think, speaking to that in particular, the Artist Pension Trust is a program where literally, a select set of investors go in and buy art that they believe is going to be valuable at some point, and that the entire trust actually benefits off of the sale. And so there are models out there that are trying to do some of this work. There's obviously not enough, but I think part of the endeavor is to know, the landscape and be really thoughtful about how you're going to innovate on established models.
Yeah, and maybe looking for ideas and models outside of the classic arts worlds to see if there's something that seems to have worked in other areas here. The one thing that Eleanor's comment reminded me to emphasize is that in the challenge itself, just in terms of logistics, it's not that we are looking only for for-profit models, right? We are looking, to Eleanor's point earlier, for sustainable models. It can be not-for-profit, but as she said, it doesn't have to be sort of running it should not be, doesn't have to be. The idea that she was mentioning, that not-for-profits don't have to be running deficits, but is critical to remember. Even if you suggest a not-for-profit idea in the challenge, let us see, let the judges see how this is not going to be in a constant sort of hamster wheel of fundraising, but is in fact self-supporting and sustainable. So that was just a logistics issue. And I think we have a mic up there if there are questions for our panelists, for me, for Henry, as I've already volunteered him.
Hi, my name is Maki, and I'm more from the business side. And I'm very interested in like fashion industry, especially the African-inspired or culture-inspired fashion. There's not much mentioned about like fashion industry, but if you know some of the example, I know like even like fashion, I mean designers are, I mean I think there's a range of designers more commercially oriented, more like artistic oriented. And especially, and also even because the fashion industry, how it works is sort of, even if you are showcasing your products or collection in a fashion show, it doesn't necessarily mean that commercially successful as well. So a lot of emerging designers I've seen a lot of emerging designers suffering. So I'm very
So it's interesting you brought this up because we were talking about it literally just before coming here, and I'll take that answer. So is fashion design a part of cultural entrepreneurship? I think as far as you can define clothing as culturally determined, absolutely, right? Now, the question about whether a fashion label, so by which I mean a company that has a fashion designer and maybe a business partner that's going to produce fashion clothing, would a fashion label meet the cultural entrepreneurship challenge objectives? If you look at the slides that I showed last time, one of the criteria for evaluation is impact, and what is the magnitude of impact that the proposed idea can achieve. And a single fashion label, unless there is some sort of huge mushrooming effect on maybe, as you said, African artisans or craftspeople, a single fashion label is unlikely to meet the impact criterion, right? Because what it is doing is taking the designs of one person and taking them to market, which is great for that one person, and probably great even for society if these are great designs, but it's not clear that the impact on the ecosystem is huge. On the other hand, there are companies, for example, BICO is a new organization that tries to resolve some of the main problems of new and emerging fashion designers, which are that it's very expensive for them to mount a fashion show, because it's hard to get the production for just those 30 pieces for the show done in time, because I mean, cash flow problems, etc. And BICO tries to resolve that. Now that to me, yes, it's in fashion design. Yes, it's about in a very quote unquote commercial area, but it would meet all the requirements and meet the impact factor. So if the idea is about a fashion label, think about how you can describe the impact it's going to have.
Can I add one thing to that? Mukti gave a tremendous amount of thought and care, Nitin did, and Yo-Yo and Laura Freed. And one of the aspects of this specific interest of yours is there are literally tens of thousands of cultural products that have cultural heritage. And personally, one of my interests in this initiative is that there's a member of the Board of Overseers, Nick Kristoff, who's written extensively about what he considers to be one of the greatest travesties of the 21st century, and that is the role and horrific role of women and girls in this world. And there are many examples of unsung heroes who are not privileged to be in this room, but are in places in Africa right now, or in India, in many countries where people are living at the subsistence level or worse, who've been uplifted out of poverty by a visionary entrepreneur who, with the help of this labor pool, has created and perpetuated cultural heritage through products, and some of them can be fashion. So if you were to actually figure out a partner on the ground in Africa, in a community where you could make a profound impact in production, you could actually change the lives of hundreds, if not tens of thousands of people, ideally some of these women and girls.
Hi, Eleanor. I wanted to ask you, I think one of the challenges that we see with emerging artists, or something interesting to say, is that they're not even aware that there could be another model for them out there other than this legacy model. And I'm really curious to know if you've come across organizations where you felt like the choice of a different model didn't just enhance sustainability, but actually informed the creative part of their mission in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very few and far between. I think that there are not a lot of tools to uncover innovative opportunities that are geared towards the arts community. And that's a big part of what Sustain Arts is actually trying to do. So, there's so many great resources in the academic community, in the business community, where they are culling these ideas and they're putting together the data, and they're actually reporting on impact and saying, here are the models that are working. If you just even talk about Kickstarter, you're like that information is now very publicly available. You can understand which categories are receiving the most funding, which percentage of projects are actually coming to fruition in each discipline. But it's not geared towards telling the story to anybody who is essentially a layman to that impact data. So I think that the problem is there's a disconnect, and the narratives are not reaching. And so I think that's another part of both parties needing to come together and have those discussions. So the business community, or those entrepreneurs are really interested, understanding how to talk to the artistic and cultural enterprise or ecosystem, and also artists saying, coming out and networking beyond the arts community, because that's really, it's super easy to, feel threatened by those conversations instead of looking at them as a collaborative opportunity. Say, I want to be challenged, and I want my art to challenge beyond my peers. So I haven't actually found those spaces, and it's a good conversation to continue. So if you'd like to, I would love to, but yeah. That's my answer.
To that point, one of the areas of impact under the Cultural Entrepreneurship Challenge is to create organizations that increase interdisciplinary contact between various art forms, between various artists, between artists and other non-arty communities, if you want to call them that. But exactly in this sort of idea of give and take of ideas and collaboration is what is going to lead to better organizations, better ideas, almost better creativity at many levels. That is one of the challenge areas of impact. And so anything that can address this issue of creating a zone of comfort where artists can interact with other artists or non-artists is actually quite an important area in here.
I'd also just say to the students in the room, this is an unprecedented opportunity for you. I mean, you have the resources of Harvard behind you. Yeah. You have access to some of the greatest minds in the world, some of the greatest colleagues in the world, and back to new models. That hopefully is what the outcome of this program is about. And I would urge you to look at the finalists from last year. There were 10. Read what they had proposed and find your way. But if you're here in this room, there are millions of people who want to be in this room, and it's going to be up to the students in this room who actually enter into this process to help start making a difference.
And the information on the finalists is available on the Challenge website, right? Last year's finalists, the winners, the runners-up, all of that information is available on the Challenge website, which is on the iLab website, which is ilab.harvard.edu, right? I think so.
Might be I-lab, but
just Google it. Just Google it, and you would get to it.
Henry, do you want to say something else since we're privileged to have you here?
Well, it's hardly my privilege to be here. The one thing I was thinking about is in terms of to give you a business school perspective on this, is the customer is really important. And there may be, as you sort of think about the challenge and coming up with a winning proposal, if there's a way to increase the number of consumers of arts and different types of art, that is also important. Because we've been talking about I hate to get this jargon, we've been talking about the supply side, but there's also the issue of the demand side. And are there projects that you can work on that are sustainable? Because if you increase the audience for the art and artist, you will also play a tremendous role in developing the ecosystem. So I just didn't want to leave out that side.
You mentioned about the variety of funding options, like from grant, from more like sort of commercially oriented. I kind of took that as a sort of opportunity for enterprise to sort of access to multiple funding options, but can you talk a little more about the different funding sources and also relates to sort of structure of the sort of legal entity or nonprofit or B Corp, or how those things relate to the organization?
What I was trying to get at is, you think, you come up with a 5-year plan, you think about how is this going to be sustainable over a period of time. Where is the revenue going to come from? So is that going to come from selling the product or the art or whatever aspect it's going to be? Is it going to be sold on a subscription model? Are you going to depend on advertising support? There's a whole range of income. So I guess what I was urging you to do is not fix on any one particular revenue model, but to think broadly, because you had, to go back to the example I was using, you had 2 cultural entrepreneurs sitting in New York who said, gee, it would be a great idea to present Shakespeare in Manhattan. And one entrepreneur said, okay, I want to go this way. I'm going to set up a subscription model. I'm going to look for advertising, essentially underwriting. And another entrepreneur who went opposite direction, that's all very nice. I'm going to charge $250 a seat. Now, somewhere between there, so I'm saying, so to think broadly, because those are 2 people looking at the same playwright's work in the exact same market and came up with 2 different approaches about how to fund that work.
I would only add that, when you diversify your funding streams, when you look at multiple, types, if you're like, I'm going to get a grant, but I also want to get crowdsourced, and I'm going to find somebody to support, an individual donor to support. You're going to have to respect that demonstrating the impact of what you're doing is going to be diverse as well. And so, especially when you're talking about something that is meant to demonstrate social impact, some sort of change, there's going to be a requirement to show that and showcase that. And I think that that's part of the narrative you want to tell already. But to tell it to a foundation versus a government organization versus your crowdsourced community can be very different and very challenging.
And on the legal forms, again, so rather than give you bad legal advice, I would suggest that Megan, iLab has these workshops, right, once in a while.
Yeah, we have, beyond workshops, office hours. I don't know if everyone knows, at least available to students are expert office hours, where you can go on our website and see a range. I can't even count how many experts come in, from lawyers to accountants to entrepreneurs to cultural artists themselves. We actually have an expert in resident who is a cultural entrepreneur. His next visit is December 4th, so you might want to check that out. But these are office hours where you can go in and ask someone that question, where I'm trending this way, what are your thoughts? And the lawyers in particular can give you great feedback on the legal structure for your entity. I think the thing to keep in mind for this challenge is this is not a business plan competition. So we ask for many facets of a business plan because we want to see that you have an idea that is trending towards sustainability, an idea that makes an impact. We're not asking for a business plan because it takes a really long time to figure out what organizational model you're going to have. I would say the majority of social and cultural entrepreneurs at the iLab are legal formation, are still trying to figure that out rather than just stick something on it, making sure that you pick a structure that's right for the kind of business that you have. And much of figuring that out is talking to a lot of people and getting their input. So talk to a lot of people.
An artistic vision based upon last year is something that it can be an epiphany or it can be something that's been developed over time. But there was a group last year who was a young man who had a very, very close childhood friend who was visually impaired. I think he was actually blind. And with the advent of 3D printing, thought that he could create a way for his friend to actually touch paintings. And he made it to the finals of this initiative. I think he was one of the runners-up. And will be transformative.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to people at MoMA about this. And it happened here in this space.
Yeah. And that's the other thing I would stress, that if you feel that you have to be an artist to be part of this, I would urge you to think also just of being appreciative of the impact of the arts and cultural works on our lives is quite sufficient. And trying to make sure that more of these artworks and cultural works will have more of an impact on society, and to come up with a plan for that is what we are looking for. You don't have to be the artist yourself.
There was another finalist last year who was a young woman who found two local professors who had been working for years on a software program that enabled a practicing musician to feel as if they were surrounded by a symphony. And she had the foresight and the intelligence to find these people, market these people, promote these people, and bring them in through this program. And I think she was a finalist or a runner-up as well. So that's a business person who's identifying a need and trying to figure out a way to monetize it with creative, artistic vision of other people.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Mukti, yet again. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Henry, everybody who was here tonight.